Christmas Day. Whether it's presents or snow or hot chocolate while snuggled in a blanket, there's always something to be thankful for today. As you can see, I wrote a Christmas list. But nobody got me this! I know what's wrong. They have a life and aren't video game nerds. So let's answer this question. What was the first video game ever made?
There's a big difference between the first video game ever made and the first commercially successful video game. Most people will tell you it's Pong, but those people are just dead wrong. The problem with this problem is that there are so many conflicting sources online, and as someone who did not live through the 60s and 70s, it's not like I have any life experience to prove what I've found. As we all know, everything on the internet is completely and irrevocably true. Odds are high that the actual first video game never even left the laboratory, and only 5 people on this earth know about it. But I just googled it, it's Pong for sure. Shut up, you idiot, it's not Pong! I'm so sorry about him. A lot of people think Pong was the first video game because, well, it's the general consensus. Old game on old Atari 2600, which people also think is the first video game console. It isn't? No. People tend to think this way because it's widely considered the first successful video game, which doesn't mean anything really. That's like saying Avengers Endgame is the highest grossing movie of all time, which means it's the only movie of all time. It's too bad that video game history hasn't been preserved as well as, say, film history, but I'll do what I can. Let's start working our way backwards by examining the general consensus of those who are smarter than the people who think it's Pong. There was a console before the Atari 2600, and it was called the Magnavox Odyssey. Supposedly, the Magnavox Odyssey was the first video game console. Given what I found on my search for the first video game, I'm suspicious of that, but that's a discussion for another day. This was released 4 whole years before the Atari Pong console in 1975. Despite all that, and there is a trend you're going to notice here, the gameplay is basically just Pong, but before Pong. Right now, we're in 1971, but let's head back even further, to the 60s. Yes! They'll be playing ELO at all the restaurants! Dude, ELO was formed in 1970. Don't bring me down, man. Whatever. We're still in the realm of easily Googling information about these games, given that the Magnavox Odyssey was, supposedly, the first home console. Assume that any games I talk about from now on are either arcade games or wacky experiments by scientists mucking around on supercomputers. In 1969, 2 games were made, or at least 2 that got on my radar. Lunar Lander and Space Travel. Funny how they're both space-themed. Wonder if this had anything to do with it. Lunar Lander brings up an interesting issue. Are we going to count text adventure games? Now we get into the mushy territory of what a video game actually is. Google and Merriam-Webster agree that there must be electronics, images, a screen, a computer, and some elements of control. Text adventures do not fit all of these criteria because they lack images in their gameplay. So unfortunately, these are simply computer games, not video games. Anyway, Space Travel was also made in that year, and is, in fact, a video game. Unfortunately, very little information remains about this game, and no video footage, so for most people, this picture is all we have. Let's have a moment of silence for Space Travel. Lost and forgotten. But that's still not the first video game, so let's move back even further. In 1962, an incredibly important and influential game was created, Space War. While not being the first video game, it accomplished remarkable things, such as being able to be ported to and from multiple systems. In addition, it had some minute physics simulation elements, making it incredibly advanced for its time. Kill the aliens! It was also the first game, I believe, to use a gamepad rather than knobs and switches to control it, making it incredibly accessible. Of course, it was still exclusive to laboratories and facilities with advanced computer systems, as the personal computer didn't widely exist yet. It's a really cool game. I'll leave a link in the description to a fan recreation if you want to play it. Boomer era. If someone is actually fairly knowledgeable about video games, they'll tell you the first video game was created in the 50s, and they'll be right. We're nearing the end of our search. but I guarantee they won't give you the actual right answer. It's likely they'll say the first video game ever made was Tennis for Two, built in 1958 with an oscilloscope used as a display. It played a bit like Pong, except you'll view the court from the side. Honestly, whenever I see gameplay of this, I'm impressed at the physics simulation. The ball makes perfect parabolas like it would in real life, something Pong didn't even try to do, and given that it didn't technically have pixels and instead just light, there's a case to be made for this being the game with the highest resolution ever. Better than HD, better than 4K, better than 8K, ladies and gentlemen, I present the oscilloscope. Sure, it's limited in color, but that's a small price to pay. All this is pretty great, but it still isn't the first video game ever made. We've seen a lot today. We've looked at the past era of games, the first console ever made, gaming throughout the 60s, and most importantly, proved that the first game isn't Pong. But I'm done delaying. The first video game ever made, the piece of software that began the world's largest form of media, was...
Tic-tac-toe?
Well, it's called Noughts and Crosses in England.
And the game itself is called OXO, or more likely OXO. It has the 5 elements needed to be considered a video game: electronics, images, a screen, a computer, and an element of control. And, well, yeah.
Honestly, this is a bit underwhelming. After all, we looked at advanced physics simulations and oscilloscopes, yet ended up only with tic-tac-toe.
At this point, I wouldn't blame you if you were skeptical. If you thought it was Pong originally, then I push your belief back 19 years. So let's look at the predecessors to this incredible piece of history. In 1951 and 1950, Nimrod and Birdie the Brain, respectively, were created. The main reason these can't generally be considered video games is that they don't have the proper screens. As you can hopefully see from these pictures, they used light bulbs. Nimrod played the game Nim. To be completely honest, I didn't do a ton of research on this game, but from what I can gather, there are multiple piles of stuff. Each person takes a certain amount of stuff from a pile, and the person to take the last object loses. Though we still can't call it a video game exactly, it is indeed an electronic computerized game, and an important piece of history. Birdie the Brain played tic-tac-toe, but it used light bulbs, unfortunately. Had it not, it would certainly have been classified as the first game, because many people did play against the computer. After the Canadian National Exhibition, it was dismantled and dismissed as a trinket. It's really frustrating to me that we don't have a complete record of early video game history. Early film is very well documented, but not so with gaming. The last piece of video game history that I'm going to discuss is called the Cathode Ray Tube Amusement Device. Catchy name, I know. The Cathode Ray Tube Amusement Device is considered to be the first electronic game. It might not be, but it's not the first video game, and right now that's what we're interested in. The first video game ever created was created in 1952 by Alexander Shafto Douglas and was called OXO. Now, next time your friends start arguing about what the first video game ever was, you can join the conversation. Is that how friends work? I don't know. I don't have any. Thanks for watching the video, everyone. If you got this far, you clearly enjoyed it, so you owe it to yourself to subscribe. I'll be making more of these types of videos, but if you have any suggestions for a video you want, let me know. I'll definitely take it into consideration. Like, subscribe, and post some witty comment that'll only get 10 likes because I'm not a very big channel. See you next time, everyone, and have a Merry Christmas.